Hi, everyone. I hope you are enjoying our first little cold snap. I know I am. I always like the colder weather. But I just wanted to check in with you about assignment two. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the things I noticed when I was reading through assignment one. I just wanted to give you a few more examples of how to discuss artwork. So, a few things that don't have anything to do with the visual components of the work. One thing I noticed that a handful of you guys did in this last assignment was after you introduced your artist by their full name, you then went on to refer to them as their first name only. So this is much too informal for an academic paper. The only time you would refer to your subject by their first name only would be if you're doing a one-on-one interview with them. However, since you don't know this person, even if you did meet them, it is much more appropriate to refer to them by their last name only. So if you said the artist of this piece was Jennifer Bonner, and then the next sentence you wanted to say Bonner did this, you wouldn't say Jennifer did this, you would say Bonner. You could also refer to them as the artist. The artist did this. So there are multiple ways to refer to your artist other than their full name, but you just want to avoid, really in any kind of academic paper, even if you're writing like a biography or something like that, referring to the subject by their first name only. The other thing is there were a few times I noticed in some of these papers where you mentioned formal elements, like line or light, things like that. And then you didn't go on to elaborate how that element was used. So saying, the piece had light and shadow and line and shape. That doesn't tell me anything about it. When you are describing your work, I want you to describe it as if you are telling someone who is in another room about the work. So imagine that you're in the room with the artwork, and the other person is, there's a wall separating you. How do you describe that work to them so that they can get a visual picture of it? Um, there were also a few terms that were used in kind of funky ways. So a piece can be representational without being realistic, and a piece can be abstract without being non-objective. So if a piece is representational, it tells me what it is, but it doesn't necessarily have to be realistic. So for example, this sweet little painting right here is of a wooded clearing in the snow. I can see what it is. It is representational, but it's not realistic. It doesn't resemble a photo. I can clearly see all these different little brush strokes that have been used to create it. So it is creating the illusion of the scene, but it is not creating an illusion of reality, if that makes sense to you. Another thing is that a piece can be abstract without being non-objective. So for a piece to be non-objective, you need to not be able to name anything in it. So if you can see like a tree or a cake or even like a smiley face, those things bring it more into the realm of abstraction. Non-objectivity is going to be, pieces that are really just like colors, a color field painting, or shapes that don't take any kind of really recognizable form. So if you have questions about that, let me know. There are also some art terms that are not interchangeable. So for example, this piece is a painting. I can't then go and refer to it as a photo. So I wouldn't say like the photo has this or that, because it's not a photo. A photo, I can't get it. This is a photo. So painting, photo, two totally different things. Some of you guys are probably like, well, why are you asking me that? But I know that sometimes it can be confusing. We can refer to all artwork as artwork, work, the piece. So this is a piece, it's a work, and it's a painting. So two of those words are interchangeable with other artworks. For example, this collage by my little niece, that is also an artwork. and a piece, but it's not a painting. So we just need to, think about which words work in which situations. So that's something I want you guys to think about. So I will talk to you a little bit about this piece. So this piece is called Winter Light. It is by an artist called Katie Morrill. She lives in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Obviously, you wouldn't normally be handling a painting with your hands like this, but it's my painting. I picked it up this weekend. We did a little art trade, so that's really nice. And so because I have a familiarity with the piece and it's mine, this is okay. But please don't touch the art when you go to the museums. So anyways, what I'm seeing here as I introduce this piece, and again, the title is Winter Light, I am seeing a wooded scene. I see trees. I do see snow on the ground, and I can also take that into consideration because of the piece's title. And I do have a pretty limited color palette here. I think it's good when you're introducing a piece to introduce the style. So I would say that the style of this piece is representational, but it is very stylized. I can see it's kind of impressionistic. I can see the brushstrokes, how it's made. The limited color palette includes blues, browns, a few pinks, and a few oranges. So the way the light is kind of depicted is with these sort of orangey tones here, which is nice because blue and orange are actually complementary colors. So they really sort of reflect off each other in a nice way. And the brown kind of is part of that orange family. And then these sort of purpley pinks sort of come off of the blue. So all of those colors really do feel related. And then we also get the impression of other trees back here in the distance, but they're really just portrayed as shadows. So I get different tones of dark back there. I get some lighter blues peeking through so we can kind of see light from the sky. But we have a lot of shadow happening back there. I mean, it really just feels like it's illuminated right here. The light is sort of refracting here, here, and here. And it seems like that glow is almost coming out of the snow. So we don't necessarily see a light source, but there is a light source coming from this area that's causing shadows to be cast here, across the ground here, and over what appears to maybe be some water here. So we definitely have a concentration of light here, some very crisp shadows, and then lots of shadow back there. We do get a definite depiction of sort of foreground and background, with the foreground being, here with these sort of three main trees, and then the background, those other trees back there, which even though they're sort of like abstractly portrayed, they are depicted as being smaller. They're not as wide as these ones in the front. So the way that she's done that, she's created perspective. We understand that those trees that are in the background are farther away than the trees that are in the foreground. They're just as tall, but they're smaller, so we can tell that they're farther away. We also get some really interesting use of line here. So the trees, there's sort of a lot of verticality there. They're all going up. But with the shadows, we have lines that are coming this way. And I actually feel like this is kind of the direction of the composition. We have this implied line of the ground right here. And that's kind of what whips your eyes around. And then we have, like a few hanging branches here that sort of feel like they might also be part of the foreground. I think there's some really cool visual texture that the artist has created here, using her overlapping brushstrokes. We don't necessarily know what this is up here, but it gives the impression of a number of things. It could be leaves. It could also be more snow that just has shadows being cast on it. And maybe these shadows, she's depicting them as being different colors because the light is reflecting off the snow. So these pinks and blues and things, those might actually be shadows on the snow, but we're just not sure. There's also physical texture to this piece. So if I turn it back like this, you can kind of see how the light is reflecting on the canvas. Um, so there is a lot of like actual texture that if you touched the canvas, you'd be able to feel it. She did that just by layering up her acrylic paint on the canvas. And I actually think that physical texture goes a long way to create some depth as well. So those are just some really interesting things about this piece. Another piece that I just want to share with you guys really quick, because some of you look at some works that were more incorporating collage elements. So this is a piece by a local artist. Her name is Chris Kaminik. And this is a piece that actually just normally lives on the wall of my office back there. It's called SOS, and that's for a reason that I will share with you in a minute, or maybe you can already see it. This piece is part acrylic painting and part mixed media. So it's probably acrylic with mixed media, and there are some components that are collaged out of magazines. So you can kind of see that there's some pieces here that it's like grass ripped out of magazines. And then there's parts that are actually raised off the canvas. So I don't know if you can see that that tree is actually raised off of the canvas. But she really seamlessly puts these magazine elements in with her paintings. You can see that is actually cut out of a magazine as well. But at first glance, this is a piece kind of depicting suburban domestic bliss. It's a really happy yard with the white picket fence. We've got all the toys that are across the yard. But then if you actually get closer, and it's showing up as a mirrored image here because of our camera, but you can actually see that the toys and the hose and all these things that are laid out in the yard, they spell SOS. So even though it's backwards, you guys can probably still see that SOS. Maybe it's not backwards. Maybe it's just backwards on my end. But she actually painted this piece in 2020. And so that very subtle image that she put in there was a cry for help. Like, we are stuck at home. I am sick of playing in the yard. Please send my kids back to school. It's sort of a documentation and sort of historical record of 2020, and also a kind of one-liner joke. So I think that's really cool. She, beyond interpreting the content of this piece, she does utilize perspective. So that's something that would be great to talk about. You can see that this walkway going from the front gets smaller, so you can tell that the house is in the distance. Another thing about perspective, you have this kiddie pool here. The kiddie pool is like not super big, but you take it up here, the kiddie pool, if you're like comparing size, is the same width as the second story of the house. And you know that in real life, the second story of the house would be much larger than the kiddie pool. So that's another sort of example of how she used perspective. She also used this as a sight line. So it carries us, to the house. That's sort of the first thing that we see. And then we kind of come back to look at things in the yard. She's also created some really interesting, both physical texture and visual texture. So I think it's great in your analysis when you can tell me the difference between these two things. So physical texture would be like this tree coming off the surface of the painting. Visual texture would be like these different shades of green that she has used in the house. Another example of visual texture would be the way that she's created the illusion that this house has slatted wood planking. So those are some other those are the formal elements that you could talk about. I would also say that this piece is not photorealistic. So even though she has photo elements in it, and even though I would say this house, is realistic, it doesn't, this whole scene doesn't have the appearance of real life. There is something almost animated about it. So I would say it's representational, and then it is stylized, and then you could go on to describe the style. So really just think about what you're seeing, and the way that you can describe those things. Another thing you can mention with this would be, foreground, middle ground, and then I would say that this like blue space back here that is sky is background. I would also call that negative space because there's really nothing going on back there. I do think it's important. It helps balance the piece because we have so much content that's up here. So having that is some nice breathing room. It's not weighing down on the piece. Another thing you guys could talk about is balance. So visually, this piece is like pretty balanced, even though the house is in the middle and we have things on either side, and one is back there and one's up here. I think it's really nice that kind of asymmetry because the piece is so symmetrical. Having a little bit of asymmetry really helps give it. It makes it more dynamic. So I hope some of those things were helpful for you guys hearing me discuss work, kind of off the cuff. Let me know if you have any questions about any of the terminology. I would say that if there is a certain term that you don't think really applies to your piece, don't use that in your paper. So I wouldn't say like this piece doesn't have light and shadow because it's non-objective. If it doesn't have light and shadow, talk about something else. Talk about the color, whether it's flat color or whether it has volume. You know, I would say that like the plane of this painting, there is volume in this piece because we get the illusion of three-dimensionality. This feels like a yard that you could travel into. This painting feels like a window depicting actual space. But if something is super flat and it's just like almost like wallpaper with polka dots, I would say we don't get the illusion of space here. The artist is playing with flatness. So again, hopefully those things were helpful. Let me know if you want to meet for office hours to discuss your second formal analysis. I'd be happy to work through those with you. And I hope you guys are having a great week so far. Thanks so much.